I'm Steve McInerney. I'm the Executive Director of POMED, the Project on Middle East Democracy. We're excited this morning to be co-hosting this event with our partners from OneVoice Israel and OneVoice Palestine. We're excited to have a couple of speakers who are just here in town, who've been here in the States for about a week, visiting from Israel and Palestine, to give us kind of their firsthand perspectives from the ground, not only in terms of what's happening and what the prospects for progress are on the sort of recently renewed peace talks, negotiations between Israelis and Palestinians, but also especially kind of what the perspectives are from civil society and sort of especially the kind of younger generation on both sides of this conflict. Each of our guests is associated with OneVoice in Israel and in Palestine, and we'll be able to kind of talk a little bit about the work that they do and the challenges that they see facing this conflict, and also, as I mentioned, the perspectives of civil society and youth on each side of this conflict. We'll also talk a little bit about the role of the international community and what can be done, both by not just simply by international governments, by foreign governments in supporting the peace process, but also independent organizations and civil society organizations such as ours and others here in Washington to play a supportive role in getting to Israeli-Palestinian peace. Our first speaker this morning will be Makhlouf. He is the Executive Director of OneVoice Palestine. He's been working with NGOs, a variety of NGOs in Palestine for about 10 years. He's been with OneVoice, I believe, for about 4 years. And after him, Tal Harris will speak. He is the Executive Director of OneVoice Israel. He's been with OneVoice Israel for about 6 years, and likewise before that he was involved with a variety of Israeli NGOs as well. So we're excited to have them here. I'll turn it over to Samer now.
Thank you all for coming and giving us this chance to present who we are and what we do, and give you an idea about how are things from my side in the Palestinian society. As an executive director of OneVoice movement that work in parallel in Israel and in Palestine. I joined OneVoice 4 years ago in 2009, where things on the ground was a bit different than what we see right now, and like the general atmosphere was more optimistic, and I thought that OneVoice could, or this kind of work could not be like only a job for me, but it's also a mission, because doing such work is also in order to create a better future for the coming generations and for my son. Since I joined OneVoice, I thought that in order to be effective, there is a need to create a movement, and the movement for me means to create an organization with people and supporters and presence on the ground, because without this presence and impact, we will not be able to do the change that we are all seeking for. Otherwise, we will be just, talking or doing something nice, but we wanted to do something nice and impactful. OneVoice so far I want to be a bit humble here. It's one of the biggest youth organizations, non-partisan youth organizations in Palestine. We have 700 members in 21 chapters all over the West Bank, and we have also renewed our presence in Gaza Strip. Our colleagues went back to Gaza, and they also trained the first youth group there. And so far, touch wood, there are no serious harassments by the government there, and we kind of managing to work there, even though we are working on a low profile, but still we have a presence. And as you know, the work of such kind of organization is very much needed there, as much as it is needed in the West Bank. The backbone of the movement generally and mainly in Palestine, we depend on youth. The backbone of the movement is youth, and our approach is to bring these youth, recruit them to become advocates for the two-state solution, and non-violence, because these are the most two important principles that we advocate for. Train them, give them the needed and the needed skills and knowledge to become active in their own societies in order to be able to mobilize their own societies. We try to create young political leaders in order to put them in important places, important positions, and change things and influence things from inside. The 700 youth, they are also classified over different ranks, but I can give you an example of how can we be, or the impact that we have. In the most recent municipal elections, we had 8 successful candidates from OneVoice sitting in 8 different councils. And this is what we want to do, which I call it the SALT approach, where a small quantity changes the taste of a big meal. This is the importance of our work, and we work under the mandate of, in Palestine, of course, we work under the mandate of the PLO. We see ourselves as part of, or sitting under this umbrella, where we seek to end occupation and establish a Palestinian state on 1967 borders and solve all final status issues based on the international resolutions. And this is how we, and what we advocate for, but of course we are all about nonviolence. And we try to be also present in the in different kind of activities and initiatives, because we see also ourselves as the callers for this, the two-state solution. We don't want to leave the space empty for anyone, and we need to keep the agenda alive, And I give you examples, you all, or if you are familiar with the Bab al-Shams experience in Palestine, where Palestinians went to E1 area and tried to build a Palestinian small village there. We were present. It is not OneVoice activity, but we tried to be there in order to maintain the agenda or we don't want it to be hijacked by other agendas. We wanted to maintain the two-states agenda. We also mobilize our youth leaders and we initiate our own activities, and we do several kinds of activities, mainly grassroots, but we also see our role to connect the grassroots with the leaders. And here maybe we can start talking about how the situation look like on the ground, and excuse me, and how is the perception for the negotiations and renewed negotiations in the Palestinian street. When I first heard, I had a discussion with our office in New York and with our office in London, and after that they came to visit me in my office in Ramallah for the normal work. They told me that, we all heard that the renewal of talks between the Israelis and Palestinians. I can literally tell you, like, half of me was happy and half of me was sad. I was happy because, it's time and we need to move forward, and the time is not working for our interest, the time is working against our interest. But on the other hand, I know very well how the perception for such, renewal of negotiations is in the Palestinian street. Because the majority of the people, and mainly youth, and I'm speaking about youth because we engage and interact with them on a daily basis, the majority of them are really skeptical about it, and they opposed it. And I want to be here a bit, specific. They do not oppose the negotiations as a principle, or they don't oppose peace as a principle. They are opposing the way the Palestinians and Israelis got back to negotiations. They are opposing the way they felt humiliated. They felt that I'm sorry, I have to be a bit honest here and frank. So they felt that the Palestinian leadership was humiliated by, taken to the negotiation table without even getting one prerequisite of, especially the settlement freeze. Maybe this is, this needs more discussion, but the atmosphere in general was very against negotiations. And I want to give you an example. I don't want to mention names, but I want to give you an example. We did a roundtable discussion in Palestine, and we had the top leaders, like the secretary generals of the Palestinian political parties and deputy secretary generals from all the Palestinian political spectrum, from Hamas to Fatah to leftist parties, whoever you can imagine. And they were all sitting in one room. And we asked someone to come, and we assumed that he is very close to the president and to the Palestinian National Authority. And we asked this guy, we want you to give your opinion why the Palestinians went back to negotiations. And we brought someone else to say why he is opposing that. And when this person spoke on the panel, I was shocked that he was against negotiations. So I told him, like, how come? We are here, we are supposed to at least support the president, support what is going on. But anyway, the issue is that even on the top leaders, people are not. But then in that discussion that we did as One Voice, and here is the role that we play in order to bridge the gap and also prepare the ground and create a positive discussion around negotiations. We put them in front of two difficult questions, and I asked them clearly that you are representatives of the Palestinians, you are their leaders, and you are all talking about what if negotiations fail. That is fine. We are all expecting that it might fail and it might succeed. There is no guarantee. No one can give us guarantee that it will fail or it will succeed. You never know. But what if it fails? What is the Palestinian strategy? And here is what we have to discuss now, and we have to address the issue from a positive point of view, and we have to discuss it also. What other alternatives do we have? And what if we did not negotiate? What are the alternatives, and what is the Palestinian national strategy? The other part was also, what if Abbas came back and told you, here is an agreement, we have a final peace deal with the Israelis, or interim peace deal with the Israelis? What is the Palestinian strategy here? And there started a very positive discussion about it, and we had a paper of recommendations that will be presented to the president when I'm back to the region in 1 week, and hopefully this will be also helpful for building a unified Palestinian strategy to address negotiations, because we know that without this unified one Palestinian national strategy to address this issue, we will be very weak on the negotiation table, and I'm afraid we even will not be able to implement the agreement if there is an agreement. Therefore, we will be, from now on, we already started that, through TV shows, because we think also we need to interact and communicate with the large audience. So we do a TV show with one of the most important TV stations in Palestine called Watan TV, our strategic partner. And also we do town hall meetings. And in the town hall meetings, we try to bridge the gap between bridge the gap between the grassroots, who are very much, disattached from the reality, not disattached from the reality, maybe they are careless, let me say, and living in an apathy, and they don't pay attention to what is going on, because the momentum is being built in Washington mainly, in Tel Aviv, elsewhere, but not in Ramallah. And we want also to get momentum built in Ramallah. This is why we put the audience and the grassroots in front of the leaders in a panel similar like this, and we try to tell them to speak to their people about what to expect out of this agreement, because unfortunately, we have kind of double language by many of the Palestinian leaders. They say something in the big festivals and the demonstrations, and they say something else in the closed rooms. We want them to be frank and honest with their audience, and we want them to tell the Palestinians that here is what we are negotiating on, and here is what we are expecting, and here are the Palestinian national principles that we will be hopefully aiming at. So I think I will stop here, and I will leave it after that for the questions and answers after that. Thank you.
These are exciting times. The Secretary of State Kerry has relaunched negotiations. I read the press releases of the State Department. It's very exciting. We're on the verge of peace. It's not very exciting for most Israelis. It's definitely not for the youth. We work similarly like in OneVoice Palestine, in campuses, in youth-based communities. And I would like to jump in and try to explain to ourselves, suggest some explanations as to why it is terribly unexciting that the Israeli and Palestinian leadership are back to negotiations, at least from the point of view of most Israeli youth. One explanation is that the talks are secret. Kerry has insisted, I think with a lot of wisdom, that these talks should not lend themselves to the spoilers by exposing what is discussed. Indeed, the ones who oppose negotiations in Israel and Palestine are trying to struggle to find a way, but they don't really have a lot of things to bite on because there are no leaks and the talks are secret. The disadvantage is that it's harder for organizations like us and for the general public to get into the momentum that peace is coming, the peace train is on its way. It doesn't feel that way. But this is just one explanation. I think it goes a level deeper than that. We should remember that after 20 years of failed peace talks, the impression among many Israeli youth is that negotiations don't work, that there's no partner on the Palestinian side, and there's no partner on the Israeli side. Palestinians are divided. They want to be able to deliver. The Israelis build more settlements and in many ways have shifted to the far right. Other impressions are that not only they do not work, they don't matter, negotiations, because after you speak about a certain issue for a while, you just get used to the status quo, and the status quo is reasonable. Admittedly, it's not reasonable for the 2 Israelis who were killed just last month, but it becomes tragically and cynically enough sort of white noise that the conflict takes its toll from us every now and then, but people also fail to understand the connection between the ongoing conflict, the potential solution that is represented by the new peace talks, and their national debt, and their budget that is restricted by a defense expense that is 5 times as large as the average in the OECD, to give one example. And finally, it's difficult to excite youth about these negotiations, not only because they don't work and they don't matter, but they even might hurt us. Actually, people have adopted the idea that negotiations might even hurt us. Yes, I repeat that because to me it sounds like a cognitive dissonance, but to understand what lies behind it, one can think about, from a Palestinian point of view, about negotiations as a sort of fig leaf for more settlement expansion, making people more skeptical about it. And on the Israeli side, people feel that it's another way for the Palestinians to claim more and more, and basically also as a sort of fig leaf that gives a price to the violent people. I'm not sure if I explained it perfectly to everyone here, but I can elaborate more in the discussion we'll have later on. Quickly, what I think can be done to overcome this lack of excitement and why it's important. What is extremely important is to make an effort to include the youth voice, the voice of youth in our conversation. And the voice is, it takes 2 things to do. It takes, first of all, to make the leaders and the conversation, the negotiations more accessible. So like in OneVoice Palestine, we in Israel conduct town hall meetings across the country in campuses, roundtable discussions out in the open, and also bring the youth to the Knesset in a caucus that we set up for the 2-state solution, made up of more than 1/3 of the members of Knesset, and having them ask directly, give them the opportunity, which is more unusual than in a democracy like the United States, Britain, Switzerland, where you have actually constituencies. In Israel, we don't really have this sense of accountability from our own representative. When we brought a young person who gave up his study and his workday to travel to Jerusalem from his hometown, and only 5 members of Knesset showed up, he asked them, "Where are you? Why didn't you show up?" And the next day, the next time they convened, already there were 30 of them coming up because they felt this pressure from the people. And finally, I've mentioned how important it is to make their voice present. It is also important for the negotiations and the conversation around them to be framed around the interests of youth. Think about the people who sit in the negotiating room. Put aside Tzipi Livni, they're all men. Including Tzipi Livni, they're all way over 50, I think. No offense to anyone here, but I think that in a country that is, in Palestine, 35% are youth. In Israel, a great proportion of the population is young. Not to have any of their voice in the room also means that the interest they speak about, the framing they have is very history-oriented, focused on narratives, not focused about creating jobs, not focused about creating opportunities to travel and see and open up the borders. It's very nationalistic, strict, gray, security-oriented. I'm not saying these things don't matter, but if we want to, and I believe we do have to make these negotiations more attractive to the public, we have to make them more accessible to the public, and we have to do so by bringing the public in there physically, but also framing the conversation around in a way that it addresses the real interests of youth.
Okay, thanks very much. Let me start with your comment that the description that the youth are sort of excluded or not part of the process, that the negotiating teams are primarily as you put it, primarily men and primarily over 50. To me, this echoes. It sounds very similar to. You're describing from the Israeli side. I think we hear similar things often from the Palestinians, and then also elsewhere around the region. We've seen over the last couple of years, we've seen youth play an important role in bringing about pretty significant political changes in countries like Egypt and Tunisia and elsewhere, where they had these massive youth-led uprisings. But then in the next steps beyond that, we've seen a frustration and disillusionment that the youth feel as though they led the protest movement and they helped bring about kind of spark change, but now they feel excluded from the changes that's underway, and that we've had historic elections in some of these countries and new political parties coming to power, and the leadership of these parties very rarely seem to include youth, and also I think women as well often feel excluded, and at the same time the women played an important role in the kind of protest movement. One question I would have for both of you is to what degree do you feel as though the youth in both Israel and in Palestine sort of interact with youth and elsewhere in the region, and also talk a little bit about the sort of perspectives in Israel and Palestine of some of the changes elsewhere, and to what degree do they see some of the same kind of challenges of this sort of generational divide and the youth being excluded by sort of the older generation and by the sort of established elites. So Tal, I'll start with you and then Samer.
Many of you know that in 2011 there was a big youth movement, youth-driven movement that swept the streets across the country for social change. It was I think, after the Tahrir Square and before the Occupy Wall Street movement. And I think very much like the Egyptian movement or the New York-based movement, people felt disenchanted afterwards because they took to the streets with huge expectations, even for not just reforms, but a big revolution in changing priorities, etc. And they didn't get exactly that. And in that social movement, people even held up signs saying, "We are Tahrir." Everyone 2 years later see the Arab, what was called then Arab Spring, the Arab Awakening, whatever you're going to name it, more, in a more nuanced, skeptic way. But they do understand the bottom line that is important to the conflict. They do understand that the conflict we have is not just with the Palestinians, and it is certainly not just with 22 dictators who make up the Arab League, but it is with almost 300, 400 million Arabs, billion Muslims that have a voice, that have a face. It makes it much harder for the intelligence services in Israel, but it makes it much more interesting and attractive to youth, I think, that to understand that they can, not just send letters to Mubarak, but that they have an entire Egyptian vibrant society to somehow find a way to speak to.
Samer?
I would like to start by saying that in Palestine, I remember very well when the demonstration started in Tunisia, and we kind of felt jealous because in Palestine in 1987, and I also remember that these days, I was also active in the first Intifada, and we kind of discovered very early, like maybe 20 years before the Arab youth discovered the power of youth and the power that, going out to the street in a non-violent way and change things, from that side. But when it happened in Tunisia, most of the Palestinian youth looked internally, and they were kind of feeling sad and unhappy because the internal Palestinian home is not very well organized, and they wanted to do something. And that was the first attempt in March 15th, where we also, as OneVoice youth activists, were part of it, to demand reconciliation between Fatah and Hamas. We can see like several attempts by several movements in Palestine to kind of, I'm sorry to name it like this, to kind of imitate what is going on. But I'm sure that at some point, one attempt will succeed, because the majority of the Palestinian youth, as I see it now, and this is kind of good and worrying issue, and at the same time, the majority of the Palestinian youth try to ignore or pretend that they are not paying attention to the bigger issue, which is the occupation, and they started looking more internally towards internal issues related to the internal reconciliation. We have now Tamarrud Gaza movement, which is getting momentum and getting support, and for some reason, for their own reasons, Hamas, we can see like the comments and the responses from Hamas officials. They are really terrified of such a movement. I think in Palestine we need such a movement. There will be such a movement, but I'm afraid that once this movement is established and they're taking care of internal stuff and internal issues, then they will pay attention to the bigger picture and bigger issue, which is the occupation. I'm afraid that things will be too late. So we need to work, in parallel and together, so we can achieve everything internally and externally together.
I would just add that in terms of the practical steps we took, and I think that it was also mirrored in Kerry's efforts, if I can say, or complemented by his efforts, to engage the Arab world in the conversation about peace is significant. We have the Arab Peace Initiative sitting on the table for over a decade now, and it became much more relevant to the Israeli conversation. Trying to find a regional solution, coupled also not only with Kerry's top-level efforts, but with the possibilities that are lent by the social media. I see on OneVoice Israel's Facebook page, which is constantly growing, conversations that sometimes you look at it and you don't understand the historical significance, not less than that. Tunisians speaking in Google translated Arabic into Hebrew on the Facebook page, saying that should they live in one democratic state, which is something that it's a conversation that is suddenly happening between Palestinians, Israelis, Tunisians, Egyptians. It's not guided by anyone. It's just the virality of the web. But if we have solid top-level solutions like the Arab Peace Initiative to correspond with, then we can bring those voices also to the Knesset, to our caucus that I mentioned, and demand answers from the leaders. Why is this not followed through? So I think interesting changes happening.
Thanks. I wanted to ask a little bit about, a little bit more specifically and practically in terms of the kind of things that you all would like to see from international actors, and again, not just governments, not just Secretary Kerry and the U.S. government's efforts, but in terms of other international organizations, that would like to be supportive. I appreciate both of your sort of very frank and honest sort of description of the sort of disillusionment and sort of lack of excitement among the youth, either in Israel or Palestine, in the wake of the restart of negotiations. What kind of steps would you recommend to help address? What kind of things would you like to see from the outside, from the international community, in terms of addressing some of the concerns of the youth that you've described to us? Sam?
I think there will be like two paths and two ways of doing this and giving support for the youth in the region and for the process as in general. We know that when President Barack Obama was in the region, he said that the politicians will not act unless they are pressured or pushed to act, and we know this very well, especially in the countries like the United States of America. And we know that also the work should be comprehensive, and in Arabic we say one hand will not clap. So we need the help of every single person or organization or entity to do the following. First of all, we need to keep the pressure on all sides. I mean, like Palestinians, Israelis, and Americans. And since we are here talking about the American role and American politics, I think it's important to some sort of clarifying and pressure that the Americans will play a balanced role and keep the same distance from like honest brokering between the Israelis and Palestinians, because we all know how the agreement will look like, and we know that if you leave it to two small, like two young people in Palestine and Israel, you put them in one room for a couple of hours, they will get out with an agreement, because the framework of an agreement is well known. But the issue is that we need to pressure the leaders to deliver this agreement, and also to avoid kind of passing or putting on the table some sorts of solutions that will not satisfy the minimum of what the Palestinians, I'm talking about from the Palestinian side, from what the Palestinians are expecting. So this role is important by giving or putting some sort of pressure, and also the support for the youth in the region to empower them as well. And we see our role, and I know that in the opening remarks that I gave you kind of a pessimistic picture of what is going on, and I said I want to be very frank. But on the other hand, I can tell you that things will change. The more the negotiations will go, things will change. People will start feeling the benefits of these talks, and with the role that OneVoice and similar organizations play in the region and in the Palestinian society, we are aiming at changing the public mood, and we are changing how the youth are perceiving this process, and we want them to engage positively. And this is why we have a one-year program from now on to change. And I can tell you, like, I started seeing some indicators from small initiatives that we did, that change is possible and hope is possible. The most critical point in the Palestinian society, especially among youth, is hope. So people will, when you ask them to speak about, or when you want them to engage in something related to politics and peace process, they are very skeptical, because on their way to the whole, like a town hall meeting, they will see another settlement here or another checkpoint there. It is not really encouraging. But still, with the role that we play, with the way that we speak to youth, we change this state of pessimism to optimism, and we give them hope. We inject hope in the youth through nonviolent activism and through discussions like this. And also the role of the other parties, let me say, American organizations, American entities, and other organizations, is to support the good work that is being done on the ground there, because we want to amplify. We know that there is kind of a silent majority there, silent, apathetic majority. We need to empower them and awaken them. And here is maybe where you can also help.
Great.
Just in 2 words, I would say practically, you are all interested people in the issue, and you're all based in DC, a place that certainly matters, or you're working from here. And I think that in the conversations around here that you initiate or that you take part in, ask yourself, is the voice of youth echoed? I mean, the conflict, again, is managed and shaped, the negotiations are shaped and managed by people with a very different perspective than that of a big part of Israeli and Palestinian society that tends to be more forward-looking. So ask, if you're coming to a panel like this, which is not including the voice of youth, ask the organizers, why not? Or if you organize something, ask where is the voice of youth expressed. Secondly, this time, as I said, we need to remind people why it matters, why negotiations and a solution can help benefit very practically people's lives. And I suggest we do this internationally from a constructive point of view, not just pointing the finger at the culprit in the negotiations and saying we don't like Bibi, we don't like Abbas. All right, that's fun to do with the morning coffee and paper, but practically and reminding Palestinians the better future that they can have, Israelis the better future they can have by initiating economic cooperations and opportunities in the background, or political ones, that of course we cannot as ordinary citizens build the sort of magnitude that a real agreement between governments can present, but we can give Palestinians and Israelis the taste, we can excite them through that. So these are a couple of advices that I can think of.
Okay, thanks. Also, one last question, both of you, and then we'll turn to questions from the audience. You talked a little bit about the sort of, obviously we talked about the perceptions on both sides being, not terribly optimistic and not excited at this moment. You said that there was sort of momentum building, perhaps in Washington more than in Tel Aviv or Ramallah. But frankly speaking, I think here in Washington, to be honest, I think there's not that much optimism either for these talks. I think some of the concerns that you described, that people have seen that these negotiations have not been successful in the past, lead to some degree of sort of skepticism and caution here in D.C. as well. I think also there's a sense that the broader environment in the region right now, over the past year, for example, as there's been deterioration in the situation, for example, in Egypt, and sort of steady escalation of conflict in Syria, I think there's been a feeling that the sort of environment regionally might not be conducive, or might not be the right time. There's also been a fear that as the political situation in some of these countries has deteriorated, that people in other countries may be in the region may be less enthusiastic for trying to change the status quo. And you mentioned, Tal, in your remarks that while there's lots of problems with the status quo, there's been this sort of complacency that's arisen within Israel, that it can be accepted, and the sort of the violence and the problems caused by the lack of resolution of the conflict have become quite noisy a little bit. Could you both talk a little bit about the perceptions and the kind of changes in the region and the deterioration, including among some of the neighboring states to both Israel and Palestine, and any thoughts you have on what can be done to help sort of encourage more optimism that despite the sort of negative trajectory of some of the states in the region, that this could still nonetheless be an opportunity, could be a moment in which there could be progress in Israel and Palestine.
Okay.
Samar, if you'd like to start.
Yeah, okay. So I would like to start by talking a little bit about the status quo. Many people think that the status quo is sustainable, or some people who are benefiting, I'm talking on people on both sides, or even many sides, like the Israeli-Palestinian, even international. Many people are benefiting from the current status quo, or they feel like it's comfortable for them. In Israel, Israelis are living in Tel Aviv bubble mainly, in an apathy. They don't see any reason why they should feel the sense of urgency. In Palestine, people are kind of, also living in apathy, and we started developing the Ramallah bubble as well. So people are kind of becoming more and more disattached from the politics and from the realities. But I say that what is going on in the Arab region, in the neighboring countries, in Syria and Egypt, and maybe sometime in Jordan, you never know. This rings a bell, and it's a very serious alarm that we should consider that again the time is not working for our interest, and what is happening in the Arab region should be a motive to address the Palestinian-Israeli conflict in a very serious way. And this is why I said there should be all the weight put on the table right now in order to accomplish a deal, because I'm afraid if we don't achieve the deal in the coming 9 months, by the end of this round of negotiations, things will be very difficult, and I think that the region or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict will be shifting towards, options and solutions that are not pleasant to any of us in this room and in the region. So I think that there is a need to change the status quo, and there is a need to consider what is happening, because as a Palestinian young man and as a Palestinian, involved in politics, I see that the changes in the Arab world were, in the beginning I was very optimistic, and when you mentioned the word Arab Spring, I told you, are you still calling it the Arab Spring, because the changes are very dramatic and very big, and I'm afraid that it will have a negative impact on the Palestinian situation internally and as in general. So we need to encourage the movements, and we need to encourage and educate the youth of what we mean by the Arabs, or what is a spring, and how they can really get, because they want to become engaged and activists in different fields. So we kind of lead them and educate them to lead and get engaged in the right path.
Thanks. I think that it's true that there are numerous security arms, agencies of intelligence that monitor all the threats we've got around, and they're in abundance, unfortunately. There are not many who map out the opportunities, so let me be the optimistic one here and remind ourselves that with all the regional turbulence, security cooperation for Israel with the Egyptians has moved on from Mubarak's regime throughout the Muslim Brotherhood, throughout the current military regime of Sisi. Syria, with all its massive, horrible civil war, the border was kept with relative stability. Jordan cooperation maintains. The Arab Peace Initiative is still on the table. No country is as suggested, and it's ratified every year. It's not just on the table for gathering dust. It's reiterated in Baghdad last year. This year I expect that it will be again reiterated, and it's not abandoned, not by Tunisia, not by Yemen, not by any of its signatories. There are opportunities there, but I also don't want to be naive. We know that the region is something that already also my Palestinian friends, colleagues, they don't understand how to anticipate, and it's on the other hand, while the entire region, and I say this to our government with one voice, since the United Nations bid of the Palestinians in September 2011, which followed the Tahrir Square revolution on January that year. While the region is outside of our reach and increasingly unpredictable, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a bilateral responsibility. It is Netanyahu's and Abbas to solve. It is not something that can be kept on the shelf until one day all the cards will play out and everyone will sing, kumbaya, or at least have free and democratic elections everywhere across the Middle East. Some pointed out the dangers in waiting for that, but there's also no excuse to wait for that. There's just no excuse. An occupation can end the minute Netanyahu's government decides to do so and agree upon that. The end of claims that the Palestinian people have towards Israel can end once the occupation and the conflict ends in an agreed upon way between Israel and the Palestinians. And the fact that the turmoils and of the Arab Spring, Arab awakening have not reached Palestine yet means that we still have the opportunity to conclude a deal which proves itself stable with Egypt, with Jordan, and there's no reason to assume it would not be stable in Palestine too.
Okay. Thanks very much. This time I'd like to open up to questions from the audience. If you could just please briefly introduce yourself, state your name and affiliation before, and then specify if you'd like to address your question to either of the specific panelists. We'll start here in the front, and please wait for the microphone as well, please.
You want to stand up? Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
My name is Daniel Nirenberg. I'm a PhD candidate at George Washington University. I just came back from doing my fieldwork in Palestine. And I suppose I have two organizational questions for, I guess, each one of you. For Samir, I wanted to know, I'm not entirely certain on what OneVoice does. From what I understand, it's to harmonize leadership and the grassroots on supporting a two-state solution and nonviolence, right? That seems to me to be quite a challenge, given that, as your anecdote shows, even people within the PA or the PLO don't agree that the way that a two-state solution should look, or even that a two-state solution is possible at this point. And from my time there, and I spent a fair amount of time there in the last 5 years, it doesn't seem to me that there's much popular support for a two-state solution, and a growing support, if not for a one-state solution, for at least the acknowledgement that a two-state solution is dead, or at least that after this next round of negotiations it will be. So organizationally, I would like to know what OneVoice does when, if in 7 months' time Abbas comes back and says, we don't have an agreement, what's the mandate of the organization? How can they continue to work towards promoting nonviolence and perhaps civil and human rights within Palestinian territories? So that's the organizational question for you. And then for Tal, my question is, I wanted to know who you represent in Israel, and it seems to me that it's mostly Israeli Jews. And I get that from your Facebook page, in which the motivation and the messaging on the Facebook page is to promote a two-state solution so that there can be a Jewish majority in Israel. And that's something that is prioritized over and over again. And that leaves 20% of the population out of the equation, not including Jerusalemites who technically are in annexed Israel but don't have the rights that even Palestinian citizens of Israel have. So those are my two questions.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. Samir, if you'd like to...
Yeah, I would like to start by giving very quickly about the polls for the support of the two-state solution. In 2009, OneVoice did a poll in Israel and in Palestine, and it was related to the conflict and mainly the support for the two-state solution, and also addressed all the final status issues. I don't want to go into much details, but I will give you an idea about the findings that we had. 74% of the Palestinian society was supporting the two-state solution, and I think 76% of the Israelis were supporting it. The most recent poll that I saw a couple of months ago by the Jerusalem Center for Communications, Media and Communications, it shows that the support for the two-state solution in Palestine is now 52%, and the support for the one-state solution is 24%, while here is the issue. The support for the one state in 2009 and now, it was around 24-25%, while the support for the two-state solution dropped from 74 to 52, which is significant. It's a big drop. But these people did not go to the support of the one state. They are somewhere in the middle. And if I can give one word that explains this, is that this is the hopelessness. People are kind of careless now. We can bring this number back to where it was originally, or used to be originally, by reversing or Nizar, maybe you help me. إيش يعكس? Reversing the situation on the ground and creating positive facts instead of the negative facts that we see by the settlements and so on. And I give an example for this, and excuse my example if you don't like it. It's like when you have an infection in your throat. The problem is the infection, but there is a symptom that comes with this, which is the fever. So when you want to deal with the fever, you deal the infection. And it's the same when it comes with the drop of the two-state solution support. The problem is not, or this drop is not original. It is because of people that they are, hopeless. If we change the state of hopelessness into a state of, being optimistic, this will become like the fever will go away because you are dealing with the serious issue, which is the infection. So if we stop the settlement building, if we see serious steps on the ground to improve the Palestinian economy, freedom of access to different places, and so on, you will see directly that this support will go back to where it used to be. Because the Palestinians now, the support for the two-state solution is not something only ideological. It's also like pragmatic, and people understand that this is the most applicable solution. I know it's not the most justful solution, but this is the most applicable solution that will guarantee a better future for us and for the future generations.
I think you raised a couple of very important issues, so thank you for that. And about that lack of hope or lack of belief already in the practicality of the two-state solution, I sometimes ask Palestinians that I meet how they'd feel again if they could reevaluate their feelings in a situation where bulldozers begin to evacuate several settlements, and they see that on TV, and you see their facial expression change. It's like speaking of utopia for them. But if it happens, I can only take it from summer and from my own encounters that suddenly they say, well, I like that idea, I like the two, but they say it's not practical. And many Israelis say it's not practical, and maybe that's one of the biggest victories of the far right in Israel, that have managed to create among all of us, peace-supporting, compromise-supporting people, a sense that it's no longer possible. Well, one of our key messages for the next 9 months is that it's, in Hebrew, katan aleinu, literally meaning it's small upon us, small potatoes. With all due respect to 80,000 people who need to move to a different city 20 minutes from their home, we're a country that absorbed 1 million Soviet Union immigrants in a couple of years without hardly any international support. This is small potatoes that the settler lobby tries to portray as a barrier that we will not pass. So I think that we need to be mindful of the challenges and to ramp up our efforts but at the same time, remember, like Samer said, that it's the only practical solution, as difficult as it becomes, that both sides could live with. Not be terribly excited about, but accept. Now, regarding your question about Palestinian citizens of Israel, our Facebook page speaks about the nature of the state, the social nature. It also speaks about our security concerns, our economic welfare, our moral imperative for a true democracy. My latest op-ed published on Monday spoke directly about the lack of democracy that is coming up by the theses of the far right. And I think that the mainstream in Palestinian citizens of Israel understand that. I think that based off on our board members who are Palestinian citizens and our staff member, some of them are Palestinian citizens of Israel. And also I understand that from the polls, because Prime Minister Rabin was in no way not Zionist, but under his term, when he spoke about democracy, I think that Palestinian citizens of Israel, 85% of them said that they're proud to be Israelis, not. And under Foreign Minister Lieberman, you can imagine that it dropped under 50%. He used the same term, democracy, but everyone knew what lies behind those words. And One Voice in Israel promotes in One Voice with Palestine the same type of democracy that I think Rabin was, making the majority of Palestinian citizens proud of, and that enables them to. That probably is what triggers a lot of them to approach our Facebook page and ask to join the activities in the north and a bit in the south too.
Okay. Other questions? Yes, here.
I'm Howard Sumka. I used to be the USAID director for West Bank Gaza. For a while, I was also the CEO of OneVoice, but that has no influence on what I'm asking. For Samer, you said that a view on the street among the youth is that Abu Mazen was humiliated when he went to the table because he didn't get anything. In all of these sort of secret negotiations and the preparations for getting to the table in the first place, what bit leaked out is that Netanyahu was given the choice of accepting 67 lines or freezing settlements or releasing prisoners, and any one of those three would have been acceptable to Abu Mazen. As we know, Bibi selected the prisoner release, and I wonder why the view on the street is still that he was humiliated. I mean, was there a view that he should have gotten all three, that one's not enough, that prisoners is less important than the other two? And I wonder how that comes up in the work that OneVoice does with youth in Palestine. And for Tal, on the political side, there's a lot of talk about one state, Bibi about two states. Bibi has made his Bar Ilan speech and done virtually nothing to support anything that he said in the Bar Ilan speech. And he operates within a coalition which has made his life extremely difficult. And ironically, he's become kind of the left wing of the Likud party, which is hard to imagine. So the question is the work that OneVoice youth do, and in particular the TwoState caucus in the Knesset, which has 40 members now, about a third of the Knesset. How can you mobilize young people in Israel to overcome the political straitjacket that Bibi seems to be in, not only in Likud but with Yisrael Beitenu and the other parties that are in his coalition?
Thank you, Howard. The issue with Abu Mazen and how the Palestinians see it, it's an issue of perception. And again, it's the problem of disconnect between the leaders and the people and the grassroots. Like, I never heard Abbas or any of his assistants going out in a speech. I was expecting him to give a speech for the Palestinians, explaining to them why did he go back to negotiations. I'm sure that he has his own reasons, and these reasons make a lot of sense. But the problem that he did not communicate these reasons to the Palestinians, and this kind of silence approved for the kind of encouraged the between two brackets the conspiracy theory among the Palestinian community. I'm not talking about my point of view. I'm just telling you how people feel about it. That the Americans, that are always backing and supporting Israel, pulled Abu Mazen because it's related to the internal politics and so on. And this what was written in the Palestinian media. So it's the issue of the perception and the disconnect. That's why it's the problem. And again, I think that also Abu Mazen, which I like, and I consider him a very pragmatic and very honest person, but he is also maybe committed a mistake when he when he climbed on a very high tree and did not find the ladder to go down that tree. So my question was, I even wrote an op-ed about it, why did we wait 3 years if we are going to go back to negotiations without settlement freeze anyway? So why didn't we start since 2009? Why did we wait another 3 years where more bad things happened on the ground? But, this is, I hope that this is also can be changed when, some good news to start to being leaked from the negotiations. People will forget about the way he went back to negotiations and will start thinking about the future and something more important.
Yeah. First of all, it's 41 MKs. We say in Judaism, every soul is an entire world. Yeah. So, but the question is a serious one. Netanyahu is politically in a difficult situation. If he wants to move forward, it's not the same Likud that Sharon had, from which Kadima emanated, to remind everyone, in 2005, and there were very moderate parts in Likud then, now less so. Even though, with all due respect to the far right of Likud now, only 17 members signed a letter urging Netanyahu to revoke the Oslo principles and the two-state solution. And once they've got their seat, they also put aside a lot of their ideology and will to fight the prime minister on that. We will continue to show Netanyahu that he has a public base of support if he does want to do the Sharon kind of act and go against his immediate party members and voters and go for a major historical step. We'll provide that public backing by a media campaign and on the ground activities that speak about the interest of why it's important to people and getting them in the conversation. At the same time, we'll use our more immediate leverages and contacts in the coalition and the opposition to not let negotiations be a fig leaf, as we said before, to more settlement expansion and more negative acts without at least a counter response. So we have, every time there was an announcement of another settlement construction, we waited outside Naftali Bennett's house when he announced preferential treatment of settlements over the legitimate cities of the south of Israel, and we waited with residents of those cities outside his fancy villa in Ra'anana, where I live, and we demonstrated all night outside of there for the media and for him to know. And the caucus that we set up convened immediately after negotiations broke out to make sure Netanyahu knows that if certain extremist parts of his government pull out, he's got the alternative waiting for him in the opposition to take their seats for a true peace arrangement. So to sum it up, expanding and highlighting, concretizing the wider support for Netanyahu to make a historical move, and on the more micro level during talks to continue monitoring what goes on the ground and respond, be it in demonstrations or within the Knesset, and not let them just get away with it, so to speak.
Thanks. We have other questions on Nizar in the back.
Hi, Nizar Palmed, Civil Society's Program Director. Thank you very much. This has been very interesting. I would like you to maybe elaborate a little bit more about your strategy. And it's along two axioms. The first one is the way you were talking seems like you said you had 700 people in different areas of the West Bank. So it seems like there is some sort of threshold that you think would be like a game changer. So is it a number of members that you will get, or is it the quality, something happening, like something with the Arab Peace Initiative? What are the things that you think need to happen so that we get to this level of going back to 74% supporting the two states and actually believing that it's possible? Because I agree with you that it's desirable, but again, the majorities in both peoples do not think it's possible, right? So what are those variety of steps that you think you need to take until you get that threshold, whatever that threshold is, if you can elaborate on that? And what are you doing to get there? The second one is, just as much as there is a group of people who are coming together to try to bring people together, there are organizations and coalitions on either side that are advocating exactly the opposite, right? Who are saying it's a bad idea, the other side needs to be excluded, what have you, right? And they are also organizing along those lines and getting and being very smart about it. So my question to you, what is OneVoice doing in order to try to engage that, try to get the people who are on the fence on do they support OneVoice or do they support the other side because they seem to make more sense or are more practical. And what is the real threat that the other side, the other people who are advocating against what you're saying, that they would actually succeed?
What was the last thing you asked?
So on the level of dealing with the groups that are advocating the opposite, right? There obviously are people who are on the fence, who don't know one way or the other, are hearing both arguments and are getting convinced by either. So what are the things that OneVoice is doing to convince that gray area to come towards OneVoice, so that you, again, going back to the first question, how do you get to that threshold or critical mass of people to support OneVoice? And the second is, what is, in your perception, the real threats that are emanating from that other camp? What are possible successes that they may have that are really going to undermine OneVoice mission?
Okay, thank you, Nizar. I would like to start with the quality versus quantity issue. I think, and I believe that both are important. In OneVoice, we pay attention, and we pay attention to both. The quality part of our work, or building our youth network, is through investing in this 700 youth and making them better and bigger. So it's a long process that we start by recruiting and giving them training over years. And I'm talking about a very professional training to get them the tools that they need to become active. And I call it, this is the first circle around the movement. But I can also describe about 2 other circles that are wider. So the network of these 700 youth leaders, which could reach to thousands, and then we speak about the large audience that support our mandate, and we communicate with them on a daily or weekly basis through town hall meetings and initiatives. So we pay attention to the quality and to the quantity. Now we are working very hard in order to expand the support for the OneVoice and engage more people. And my goal this year is to reach up to 1,500. Hopefully we are on the way. By the end of this year, I think that OneVoice members will be around something like 1,500. This is possible, and just this is also an indicator that it is not impossible to move this gray area into the white, what we call white area, to bring them into our camp. But how to do this is the key question. And I explained that the biggest problem is that when you go out to the streets and we speak and engage with people, they don't believe that it is possible. It's not that they don't support it. They don't believe it. Like, they see what is happening on the ground, and they see, like, they get into the state of, kind of, they give up on the idea or something. Our role, and it's a key role here, is to change this state of apathy and carelessness and hopelessness into a state of full of hope and energetic. And there is a secret thing that, or a secret word, which we call engagement and nonviolence. If you get these youth, and if you give them the platform, if you give them the ability to get engaged through nonviolence, like, I give an example, and I want to be short here. We have a very good chapter in Bethlehem. In the eastern part of Bethlehem, between Jericho and Bethlehem, there is 180,000 dunums, which is 180,000 acres. The Israeli army issued an order to confiscate them, and the excuse was that it is not used by its owners. So what we decided to do as OneVoice, through our activists, we said, like, let's take off this excuse. We went to that area, and we sent out hundreds of youth with the people who are living there, and we told them, listen, let's plant it. Let's plant trees there. This is a very nice this very nice activity where we planted hundreds of trees, and we get all the community there from their surrounding villages engaged. They all get, you can see, like, in one act like this, it's symbolic. It's not like something super big, but something like this got the whole region engaged. And there now you should go there and see how the area there is becoming, how the people are getting engaged. And I can bet you that we change these people from the gray area to the white area because we give them a platform how to engage in a nonviolent way. And it's very powerful. So that is maybe kind of an answer to your question.
Thanks. Tal?
Quality or quantity? Woody Allen has in the end of his movie Love and Death this wonderful saying that he says that in sex it doesn't matter the quantity but rather the quality of your sex life. But if you have one time a year, then you better go see some consultant. So we recognize that a significant amount of people is meaningful, but what they can do is even more important. The great masses, we're longing for the minute that people will swarm the streets, 500,000 Israelis will take to the street demanding peace. I also recognize that it's not a single organization that can create this, but it's rather an overall picture of reality that will encourage that, either great hope or great anger. That's historically, ever since politics was made, is great hope or great anger get the masses out there. But what 80 students with iPhones or smartphones can do in a town hall meeting when they all text at the same time the Speaker of the Knesset to his mobile phone and they say, we demand that you do not legalize illegal outposts, that has its impact. It works everywhere politically. And also the people who got rid of Mubarak were only a fraction of Egyptian population. What do we do with the people on the fence? I would say appeal to narrative that reminds them that it is possible. Like I said, it's small potatoes in a way. We've done greater things in our 64 years or 65 years of independence, then evacuate a few people, then agree on a deal with the Palestinians. So it's small potatoes, it can be done. And also appeal to interests. So as I said, before elections, we spoke to people about what the benefits to their own pockets can be by making peace and not just this technocratic high-level conversation that we love to engage with, and it worked. Election results were better, and hopefully if we stick to that conversation, also the outcome of these negotiations will be better than previous ones. And finally, you asked a tough question where I admit that we're lacking a good answer to. How do we face the real challenges by the extremists, by those who use violence, by those who would set negative facts on the ground? Once there's a settlement expanded, Samer can spend a weekend seminar explaining to people that it doesn't mean, that they should lose hope, but it's a fact on the ground. When people are killed, people are killed. We are not going to resort to these kind of actions, of course, and that's the limitation of our power. But I think that also people are basically looking for a way out of this, to solve these kind of phenomena. So when they see a settlement that frustrates them, they're frustrated, or when they see death, they're angry. But then after they don't only think with their stomach, they want to find a real solution to that. And that's when in a town hall meeting we can calmly discuss these negative facts and speak of a solution. That's the best we can offer, but I recognize the power of violence is probably greater than what sometimes. I mean, in the immediate, let's say.
Okay, thanks. We have time for maybe a couple last questions here in the front.
My name is David Bardeen. I'm retired. Samer said several things that I was very interested in, and I didn't hear anything from Tal, so I'm asking for both of you. Samer told us he has 700 members. It's a membership organization. He aspires to 1,500. They're trained. Okay, I gather from Tal's silence that his group is not a membership organization, but maybe I'm wrong. If it is, I'd like to know what their membership is. But Samer also talked about addition for the great target, which hopefully the political leaders might get to someday. Find other targets, dig in things which are meaningful now to people today. I'm curious, in your two organizations, have you yet identified anything that's meaningful today and maybe doable today, both in a Ramallah-based organization and in a Tel Aviv-based organization? So there's some coordination or at least parallelism in what you're doing.
Thanks. My question is for Tal, but Samer, feel free to comment if you'd like. It seems to me that domestically within Israel, the Israeli left has been pretty consistently outmaneuvered by the right since Netanyahu was first elected. And I mean, I think you saw this when Mofaz decided to join Netanyahu for a very brief period of time, and that sort of led to a lot of criticism. But surprisingly, even despite some of these mistakes, I would call them mistakes, the elections were a lot closer than a lot of people thought. And raising the question of, is there a bigger constituency than we might think? Or on the flip side, is it because some of the centrists who ran and were embraced by the left were a little more silent on peace and the peace process than probably you would have liked? So I guess my question about the Israeli left, what mistakes, if any, what have been some of the biggest mistakes you think they've made recently? And what advice would you have to the political leadership of the left moving forward, both in the next elections in the long term, but also as this negotiations move forward?
I'm truly not trying to be evasive towards the first question, but maybe Samuel will begin, will answer to it, and I will add, and maybe you got it better, and otherwise I'll ask you to